I never thought I'd be the person sitting in a quiet house, staring at a black dress and wondering if I was actually the villain in my own family's story for cutting them off forever. My husband, Mark, was the kind of man who could make a rainy Tuesday feel like a holiday. But 6 months ago, he was taken from me in a car accident that shattered my world into a million jagged pieces. On the day of his funeral, the day I needed my parents more than I've ever needed another human soul, they weren't there. They didn't show up to the church, they didn't come to the burial, and they didn't even send a text until hours later, claiming they had a life-altering appointment they couldn't miss. I found out later that they spent that afternoon in a private psychiatrist's office, not for their own grief, but to start the process of having me declared mentally unfit so they could take control of my inheritance and my house. Am I the monster for making sure they lost everything instead? Tell me, honestly, would you have found it in your heart to forgive them, or would you have done exactly what I did and burned every bridge back to them? To understand how my own parents could plot against me while I was at my lowest, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller family. Growing up, I was the golden child, but not in the way that implies I was spoiled. I was the golden child because I was a high achiever who never caused trouble, which meant I was a reliable source of pride, and eventually, a reliable source of financial security for them. My father, Robert, was a man who lived far beyond his means, always chasing the next big investment that inevitably failed. My mother, Alina, was his enabler, a woman who cared more about the labels on her handbags than the reality of their mounting debt. When I married Mark, a successful architect with a heart of gold and a very healthy savings account, my parents saw him as their personal ATM. Mark was always kind to them, helping them out with loans that we both knew would never be repaid, but he was also smart. He set boundaries. He made sure our personal assets, including the beautiful historic home we bought and renovated, were protected. When Mark passed, the grief was an ocean that I was drowning in. He was my partner, my best friend, and the person who kept my parents' greed at bay. In the weeks leading up to the funeral, I was a ghost. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and I certainly wasn't thinking about money. My parents, however, were thinking of nothing else. They were constantly over at the house, but they weren't bringing me meals or helping me with the funeral arrangements. They were poking around. I'd catch my mother looking at the artwork on the walls or asking where Mark kept the important papers. I was too heartbroken to see the red flags. I thought they were just being eccentric or trying to be helpful in their own warped way. The day of the funeral arrived, and it was a gray, miserable morning. I waited for them at the church. I kept checking the back doors, expecting to see my father's silver sedan pull up. My brother Leo was there, looking confused and angry, asking me where Mom and Dad were. I had no answer. I sat through the service, through the eulogy that broke my heart, and through the burial in a complete daze, feeling utterly abandoned. When I finally got home, exhausted and raw, I found a message from my mother. It was brief and cold. It said, "We had an appointment with Dr. Aris that we simply couldn't reschedule. It's for the best, Clara. We will talk tomorrow." I didn't even know who Dr. Aris was. I assumed it was a specialist for my father's heart condition. It wasn't until 2 days later, when I found a folder left behind on my kitchen island, that the truth started to leak out. Inside were printouts of my medical records from 5 years ago when I suffered from a brief period of postpartum depression after a miscarriage. There were also notes, in my mother's handwriting, detailing my erratic behavior since Mark's death, things like refusing to eat, crying uncontrollably, and withdrawing from family. They were building a case. They weren't at the funeral because they were meeting with a psychiatrist to discuss how to initiate an involuntary hold and eventually a conservatorship over me. They wanted to prove that Mark's death had caused me a psychotic break, so they could move into my house and manage the life insurance payout. So that's the situation I was in. While I was burying my husband, my own parents were in a doctor's office trying to find a way to legally strip me of my autonomy and my home because they were broke and greedy. I was standing in my kitchen, holding proof that my family was hunting me like prey. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on them and the secret I uncovered that destroyed their plan, I want you to pause. Stop right here and comment below. If you found out your parents skipped your spouse's funeral to plot a way to take your inheritance, what would your first move be? Would you confront them immediately, Or would you play it cool and plan your move in silence? I really want to know what you would have done in my shoes." I decided to play it cool. My heart was screaming, but my brain went into survival mode. I called my lawyer, a close friend of Mark's named Sarah, and showed her everything. Sarah was horrified. She told me that while it's difficult to prove someone is mentally unfit, my parents were clearly laying the groundwork for a nasty legal battle. But then, I remembered something. Mark was a meticulous record keeper. He had a safe in his office that my parents hadn't been able to crack. I opened it and found a digital recorder. Mark had started recording his phone calls a year ago after my father threatened him over a loan request that Mark denied. On those recordings was my father, clear as day, saying, "If you don't give us the money, I'll make sure Clara thinks you're cheating. I'll ruin your marriage and then I'll take her for everything she's worth once she leaves you." It was extortion, pure and simple. But there was more. I went through their recent mail, which they had been redirecting to my house for some reason, and found a notice of foreclosure on their own home. They were weeks away from being homeless. That's why they were so desperate. They weren't just greedy, they were drowning, and they decided to use my husband's death as their life raft. I invited them over for dinner a week after the funeral. They walked in with fake smiles, acting like nothing had happened, though they did offer a weak apology about the doctor's appointment. My mother even had the audacity to say, "Clara, dear, you look so frail. We've been talking, and we think it might be best if we moved in here to take care of you. You clearly can't handle the bills and the upkeep in your state." I let her finish. I let her talk about how they could manage the insurance money for me. Then I placed the digital recorder on the table and hit play. The look on my father's face as he heard his own voice threatening my dead husband was something I will never forget. His skin went from pale to a sickly gray. I then slid the folder they had left behind across the table, along with the foreclosure notice I'd found. I told them that I knew about Dr. Eris. I told them I knew they were trying to have me committed. My mother started to cry, the same fake, manipulative tears she'd used her whole life, but I felt nothing. I told them that they had 24 hours to pack whatever they had brought over and leave. I told them that if I ever saw them again, I would take the recordings to the police and file charges for extortion. I also told them I was calling the bank to ensure they could never claim a cent of Mark's life insurance. The aftermath was brutal. They tried to turn the rest of the family against me, telling aunts and uncles that I had become cold and paranoid after Mark's death. But I sent the recording to my brother and the rest of the family. The silence from their side was deafening after that. My parents lost their house. They are currently living in a small, cramped apartment 3 states away, and I haven't spoken to them in months. They sent a letter recently, begging for forgiveness and claiming they only did it because they were desperate. But a parent's desperation should never involve destroying their child. I sold the big house. It had too many shadows, too many memories of the people who tried to steal my life while I was mourning. I moved to a small cottage by the sea, and for the first time in my life, I feel safe. I learned that blood doesn't make you family, loyalty and love do. My parents failed the most basic test of humanity, and while it hurts to be truly alone, it hurts less than being surrounded by snakes. This experience taught me that sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from the most. Grief is hard enough without having to fight a war against your own flesh and blood. If there is a moral to this mess, it's to trust your gut and protect your peace, no matter who is trying to disrupt it. You are not obligated to keep toxic people in your life just because you share a DNA sequence. If you think I was right to cut them off and expose them, please like this video. It helps me know I'm not alone in this. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the truth finally comes to light. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I'll see you all in the next story.